Welcome, everybody, to the special old-time fretless banjo masterclass with my guest, J.P. Harris. J.P. Harris is an old friend of mine who you might know as a traditional country recording artist from Nashville, Tennessee, but he cut his teeth early on with folk music, especially old-time banjo music. He builds old-time banjos as well, and he's been here for the last week with me in my studio in West Virginia recording a new special banjo ballad album. So we're going to have him break down one of the tunes from his record that's a wonderful traditional banjo piece called Reuben's Train, and then he's going to show us some of his technique for fretless banjo and give us just a short masterclass on old-timey fretless banjo.
That's a plan.
All right.
I'll go ahead and play the tune through for you guys. Well, Reuben made a train, put it on the track, run it to Lord knows where. Oh, it's so lordy me, oh lordy my, run it to Lord knows where. Well, you ought to been in town when old Reuben's train rolled down. You could hear the whistle blow 100 miles. If this train run right, see my woman tomorrow night, over 900 miles from my home. Well, Reuben, he got mad, Lord, he broke his fireman's neck. Now he can't read no letter from his ma. Oh, it's oh lordy me, oh lordy my, can't read no letter from his ma. Gonna take my razor blade, lay old Reuben in the shade. Gonna start me a graveyard of my own. Oh lordy me, oh lordy my, start me a graveyard of my own. Well, Reuben made a train and he put it on the track. Now he's running to Lord knows where. Oh lordy me, oh lordy my, running to Lord knows where.
Woo! Nice, man.
Hey, you.
So, before we jump into the breakdown of this tune, could you tell us a little bit about this particular banjo? Because this looks like it has frets on it, but there's no frets on the fretboard. Is this what you call a zero fret?
It's called a flush fret.
Flush fret.
It is a fretless banjo.
Right.
This is one I built, I don't know, probably 4, 5, 6 years ago.
So this is a banjo you made?
Yeah, this is one I made. It's number 0116. So it was made in about 4 years ago.
Is it Big Bottom? Is that the name of your banjo?
Yeah, they were sort of informally known as the Big Bottom Special, which another thing you'll notice about this banjo, if you can see, is it is exceptionally deep.
Yeah.
I prided myself in my younger days when I was more of a full-time banjo maker at producing the deepest banjos known on earth, deepest pots, and the advantage of that, which has caught on in popularity amongst a lot of banjo makers, is to deepen the pots a little compared to late 19th century banjos, because it increases the bass resonance of the banjo pretty reliably. Sort of no matter what the species of wood is, no matter how many plies the rim is, a deeper pot almost always equals better bass response. And being a fretless banjo player, I wanted to have a lot more bass to sort of resonate and kind of push the tune along, kind of give it a little more of a drum quality. So.
Yeah, and what's the history of fretless banjo, especially this style that you're playing right now?
Well, obviously the banjo was adapted in America via African Americans, slaves that brought over the precursors like the akanting and the banza, and there's a bunch of other
from West Africa.
Yeah, gourd lute type instruments from West Africa. And there's a lot of cousins to the banjo still found all over Africa and even up into Asia and the Middle East. But basically, it combined, sort of the European fiddle traditions that had come over with the rhythmic playing of the African lute instruments, and eventually turned into the banjo. And there was a lot of people who were still making their own banjos long into the time in the 19th century when mass-produced banjos became popular. After the Civil War, the exchange of culture between Northern and Southern soldiers and the dispersal of freed African Americans led to a big uptick in the interest of banjo playing. Mm-hmm. And so a bunch of companies came along and started mass-producing for the first time banjos. And most of those, some of the early ones were fretless, but a lot of them, they attempted to refine the instrument, and adapting the frets from guitars, which were already popular, made it a more elegant instrument to play. You could play more melodic type, more European, French, Canadian, Irish type tunes on it.
Kind of became like a popular banjo craze of that style of music that became more melodic and got away more from the folk roots.
Exactly, almost more like classical banjo. But of course, there were still people, in the backcountry everywhere who didn't have money nor catalog access to order one of these or go into a store and buy a fretted modern banjo. Mm-hmm. So people continued making fretless variants. Pretty well into. There's really never stopped, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and this style of fretless banjo playing, this comes from North Carolina?
Yes, this is sort of, I don't consider myself a truly to the letter round peak banjo player, but that was the first style of fretless banjo I heard that really influenced me to gravitate towards that. And actually, until recently, for the last 12 or 13 years, I haven't owned anything but fretless banjos.
And who were the artists who were recorded that you kind of wanted to emulate?
Well, the sort of last of the greats from the Round Peak area were Tommy Jarrell, of course, was a fiddler and banjo player. Pretty much all were fiddle and banjo players.
Fred Cockrum,
Kyle Creed. Those are kind of the big three.
Yeah.
And all of them continued playing fretless banjos well, into the 60s, 70s, 80s when most of them, passed away. Even though fretted banjos were very commonly available at that point and pretty inexpensive, but they just kept with this old traditional style. And something that I always found incredibly interesting about the fretless banjo, and the reason that I went for it so directly, is that the purest form of an old time tune in my mind is really banjo and fiddle. Mm-hmm. So often guitars were prohibitively expensive and they were fragile. They were bulky for people to carry if they moved their homestead across the mountains or went west. But banjos are incredibly durable. It's a stick and a drum stuck together. Pretty hard to break, and you could definitely fight your way out of a tavern if things got hairy with one of these things.
The banjo necktie, as they call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Where you hit somebody over the head and the head goes through the pot.
Yeah. You could probably still be in tune, except for banjos are never in tune. But anyways, but the real reason I liked it is because in traditional old-time fiddling, there are all those notes that people talk about being between the piano keys. There are these semitones and,
With the fiddle being a fretless instrument, too, you can have microtonal...
Exactly.
What they would say microtonal music nowadays.
Exactly. And something that always kind of drove me nuts is that, that is the... Well, as we use a professional studio term that we use a lot, is the stank. And the stank on those notes, those weird dissonant, intentionally dissonant notes are part of what give the tune its character.
Yeah.
And sometimes really the emotional pull of the tune.
Yeah.
And I was always really frustrated with my first fretted banjo was an old SS Stewart from the late 1880s, and a beautiful instrument, but I couldn't play those notes. You were stuck.
Stuck with the frets.
Stuck with the frets and the incremental notes that you got out of those that were very purposely, filed and set to very specific intervals on the music scale.
Yeah.
And then I realized that the fretless banjo freed you up from that. Now, while it made it a little more difficult because, notes aren't quite as resonant when you just have your finger pressing against a wooden fingerboard or even a brass overlay plate or something like that that's common. But the flip side being that the style lends itself to more movement within the melody, and it gives you that
all those slides,
slides and everything, and rather than having to fill that up with hammer-ons or pull-offs or something like that, there's a lot more sliding involved, and it gives this very slinky, cool, dissonant feel to it, and again also gives you the ability to match those intentionally dissonant notes that fiddlers play.
Yeah, and in this tune, what tuning do you use for this Reuben's Train? Is this like a special tuning?
This is specifically called the Reuben's Train tuning, which I have learned to play a lot of different tunes out of. It's a C tuning. I have completely forgotten what the notes are, but I'll pick them out for you real quick. And that makes a C chord. But if you look up anywhere on the internet, or a lot of old banjo tab books and stuff will have the Reuben's Train tuning.
Maybe we can get our crew here to throw up the Reuben's Train tuning on the screen. So
yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, we'll pop it up there for you. But at any rate, this is a tuning that's most known for the old tune Reuben's Train, which a lot of different versions have been recorded. There's a lot of different interesting stories about what the real story behind Reuben's Train were.
Right, so don't put your banjo in a bluegrass tuning in G standard and try to play this tune.
Exactly, yeah.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, and this tuning is specifically geared to give you a set of open notes and a set of fretted notes that really resonate the semi-modal kind of tuning that this is. Now, the interesting thing about this tuning, that if anyone decides to tune their banjo this way and explore further, you'll find that you can very easily play major and modal tunes out of this. You can play A tunes out of it. You can play tunes that would traditionally be a D tune if the fiddler is able or willing to tune to a cross C.
So you're not just stuck with one major key. You have kind of all the variants of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting. I'm not quite book learned enough about music to explain why that exists in this specific tuning, but it does. It's really interesting. And so again, the round peak players, the big three, I think, of Tommy Jarrell, Fred Cockrum, and Kyle Creed. Kyle Creed was a banjo builder for the entirety of his life, and there's still Kyle Creed banjos out there.
Wow.
But they were sort of the three last of the real old timers, people who didn't learn tunes from CDs or videos, or they were learning from
YouTube.
People who were alive during the Civil War, and
it's pre-YouTube.
Yeah, very, very pre-YouTube, pre-TV when these guys started playing banjo.
Right.
But it's interesting that this one region, which Low Gap, Pilot Mountain, Round Peak, that whole area.
This is like northern North Carolina?
Yeah, it's sort of, I guess,
Surrey
it's
County?
not quite, it's Surrey County, yeah. It's not quite Piedmont, North Carolina. It's not quite Western North Carolina. It's just about due south of Galax, Virginia.
Okay.
So it was a well-traveled area. It wasn't like these guys were like the Hammonds family from West Virginia, where they were very isolated from outside influence or outside instruments. There was already heavy, traffic coming through, people looking for work during the Great Depression. It was not far off the Cumberland Gap Trail. So these guys, I don't know the reason why, but they must have chosen the fretless banjo very intentionally and eschewed the fretted banjo. And they were some of the last old guys, old women, whoever, to play fretless banjos that far into the 20th century.
Yeah. Luckily for us, because they left all this incredible music behind for us to learn.
Exactly. And it's interesting, too, to think that, by the time recording traditional hillbilly music had become a thing, pretty much everyone had changed to fretted banjos, and you can almost guarantee that most of them learned on fretless homemade banjos, mountain banjos, whatever. So again, it's really interesting that even the early 78 recordings of the 20s and 30s, they were always playing fretted banjos, almost exclusively. And so it's incredibly interesting to see that these folks from this one specific area, they adopted modern guitars, upright basses, the whole nine, but they kept the fretless banjo. And so I feel like it played a really important role in preserving a really diverse style of banjo playing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and again, I think...
and this is like what you based your style upon. This is the roots of the style that you...
Exactly, yeah. The first fretless banjo playing that I heard that was really influential to me, I think, was Fred Cockrum's playing.
And is there a particular source that you got this version of Reuben from?
This is a little bit of an amalgamation. Of course, like folk music itself. I never, in my, I guess probably 17 or 18 years now of being into, playing old time music, I never delved too heavily into learning note for note any one style. And I took one lesson, had one very rudimentary tab book that
got you the basics.
Got me the basics, and then I heard this fretless banjo, and I just went and made one. I had never played one before.
So you didn't even buy one, you just made your own banjo.
I went and made the first ever J.P. Harris Big Bottom Special. I had been apprenticing under...
You're a bona fide trad folk musician.
I guess I am, because I made my first fretless, and I made everyone after that. So, I'm stubborn, too, and I don't like paying for things I could build. So, only took me 2 years of apprenticeship before I got around to building my first fretless. But,
especially if your part-time job is playing old-time music, you're not going to be a...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyways, so, I built my first one, and... I took some influence from the recordings that I listened to, especially because they were the most prominent and widely available fretless recordings. And of course, there's a lot of examples of full band recordings, but also there's quite a few sort of more directed recordings that are just Tommy Jarrell banjo or just Fred Cockrum banjo, or recordings that are mixes of them doing a fiddle tune or a banjo tune. But those were great references for me, but again, not having anyone around, I didn't know any fretless banjo players yet.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to learn something just from a recording if you're just starting out.
Yeah, so some of my techniques are things that I just kind of intuitively fell into and figured out, and when I started going more regularly to fiddlers conventions up and down the Appalachians and the Northeast and out West and all over the place,
you got to see other people's technique.
Yeah, I finally got to see a little bit. There's still, I still think if you go to any average, sizable fiddlers convention these days, you won't find that many fretless players. There's downsides too, is that if you're in a jam and someone wants to go from, the fiddle player says, hey, let's go from A to G, or G to A, you don't just slap a capo on it. You got to retune the whole instrument.
Yeah, so you can't capo these easily.
No, fretless banjos also...
just made to be open-tuned.
They're made to be open-tuned, and also they're, they can be a little problematic in the regard that, if you have a longer scale, like a 26 1/4 scale length, which is a sort of the average longest old-time banjo scale length.
That's the measurement
from the front edge of the bridge to the front edge of the nut. That's the scale length of an instrument.
The length of it, yeah.
And the way to set this little trick is that your bridge should always be equidistant, meaning the same distance from the 12th fret as is from the nut to the center of the 12th fret.
So that's how you set up.
That's how you set up your scale length. Now, of course, with the fretless, something interesting is if you would like to, if you find in a certain tuning, you would like to alter the intonation, which is where the notes lie relative to the scale length, you can actually move the bridge around as much as you want.
Oh,
so you can do little tweaks.
Because there's
and turns.
not frets there, so you're not going to get a weird...
Yeah, and you'll find
attitude.
That a lot of fretless banjo players their bridges are rarely set perfectly parallel to the 12th fret, because sometimes they find that the specific reach of their hand on the neck feels better to have what should be your fifth string, fret note to maybe be a little below it or a little above it, and people will cant the bridge.
So you can
one direction or the other.
customize for the size of your hand.
Yeah, to a degree you can. Now, I've always been a fan. I do own fretless banjos with no fret markers, but early on I became a fan of the fret markers. I like the way they look aesthetically. Also, I can hand this banjo to anyone else, and they can play it because they know where the scale length is.
Oh, right. So somebody who's used to a fret instrument, they'll get a visual guide already of where they should be putting the
and it makes it a lot easier. And this actually originates from pre-Civil War. Some of the earliest banjo inventors, and I can't remember the exact first formally documented and still existing instrument that this is present on, but emulating the look of a guitar before fret wire was commonly available. A lot of these banjo makers were cabinet makers or furniture builders or carpenters. There are early pre-Civil War banjos that do have these, what we call flush frets in the banjo building world, inlaid up and down the neck. And so they're also good if you're just getting into fretless banjo. It's very easy to get lost trying to find the notes.
Yeah.
And having these marks as a reference point, not only does it look cool, but it really gives you a lot more of an accurate gauge as to where the note sits.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Now let's break into this tune. If you can just show us how you play Reuben slowly one time.
Yep.
And then maybe we'll take a look at some of the techniques that you use. But just kind of show us like how the melody goes if you slowed it down.
Okay, cool. So, and this, everyone out there, heads up, this is sort of an intermediate tune. So you might want to be already familiar. There's a lot of drop thumbing in this one. So you might want to be familiar with the drop thumb technique.
So this isn't your beginner banjo lesson.
This would not be a beginner tune, I would recommend. I would say
intermediate.
Intermediate, for
You're ready
sure.
to move on to some funky, new, weird banjo stuff.
Yeah. So
Okay,
here's
cool.
I'll do my best to play it slowly and cleanly for you here.
That's awesome. So really, the melody there is pretty simple. It's that one slide and the open bass string.
Yeah, very few notes in this tune.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you could actually like learn that melody pretty easily, and it's got that amazing slides, like the feature of that melody.
Exactly.
And then the other thing you have going on, which is kind of a very traditional rhythmic technique from this style, is kind of this pull off.
Yeah, it's this first string pull off, and I've heard different names for it. This is not what you would call the Galax lick, I don't believe, which is taught in some old banjo tab books from the 70s and 80s. But yeah, it's an interesting. It's very difficult for me to do this slowly, but it's sort of what you might think of as like a filler lick. So if you want to just vamp in a section of a tune, or if you don't feel like playing every note in the melody, this is a cool. It's a. So you're alternating between the bass string and then a strum of the 2 or 3 high strings.
Yeah, and it looks to me like the pull-off is happening when your finger's hitting the bass string.
Exactly.
And then you do the strum.
Exactly. So it gives you sort of almost like an echo effect.
Yeah. Yep. That's really cool.
Yeah, so it's a cool little filler. And, I played, like I said, a sort of a simplified version. There's a lot of variants you can do in here. The cool thing, again, about this tuning is that you've got a really rich low C note here. And you'll notice when I'm playing the tune that I go back to that low C note a lot, which is what really bodies up the melody. If you stuck on these strings, you're not getting that nice rich bass sound.
Yeah, you really want that note.
Exactly.
And that's why you have to be in the special tuning.
Exactly. That's what this tuning gives you, is this nice, low, open, ringing note.
Yeah.
And
there's some other parts to the tune as well.
There is. There's a B part that I have sort of adapted my own version of, but I believe, I can't remember, it's either from a Tommy Jarrell or a Fred Cochran recording of the tune, but it's a simulated train bell.
Oh, okay.
And it goes... Now, sometimes an alternate that I do is a very long slide, and it's a series of 2 slides, but it's done in one fluid motion, which is...
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool. It gives a really interesting feel. And I don't remember if in that source recording where I picked up a piece of that B section, if it's done every time through, or if it's just sort of a stream of consciousness part that the player did at just one moment. But it makes for a nice variant. This tune's really droney and repetitive. There's not really any variation in the melody whatsoever. And so there's not really truly a B part to it, which is what makes that, it's fun to have this little B part to go back to. And again, it's sort of the novelty of simulating the train bell of Reuben's train.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, so what other pieces of the tune can you break down for us?
Well, I've showed you, a very rudimentary part, A part, and the basics of the B part. Again, I'll just play the rudimentary A part goes... Now that's good for anyone who's a little more in the beginner phase of banjo, because it doesn't involve any drop thumbing whatsoever. It's very, very simple. Now there's a slightly more advanced lick that involves a pull-off, a hammer-on, and a 1-fret slide.
Okay.
And this is what I think of as sort of a real trademark riff for the tune. I believe that this is fairly close to a version, again, from one of the round peak players. But it involves a hammer-on pull-off lick for that melody instead that goes like this. So you see, broken down in a slow form, it's... And that's basically the melody, all told, right there. The fun thing, too, about playing this on a fretless is that you can tweak that sort of modal dissonance of this melody to add just a little bit of flavor to the tune, if you want, by simply starting your slide on the 1st fret instead of the 2nd fret. So listen to the difference here. Versus...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it very much changes the overall mood of the song.
Yeah, it almost changes the scale or whatever.
Yeah, it does. It's really, again, not having a whole lot of formal educations about the banjo or music in general. I can't tell you what those notes are, but it's really interesting that in this tuning and with this melody, simply changing between your slide beginning on the 2nd or the 1st fret. Now, you're always ending on the 3rd fret, which is giving you an octave between the low string and the 2nd string down.
Oh, yeah.
So you're always ending there, no matter what, but it's just a matter of which one you decide to start on. Now, in the B part, you'll find I always start the slide on the 1st fret instead of the 2nd fret. That's simply to give myself a little more runway. That's all I need, is just, I need more runway to cross instead of going... I'd like to really emphasize that plunky long slide.
Yeah.
And so I start on the 1st fret and go...
Yeah.
So again, cool. Yeah, it really depends on, if you just want a little variation and sometimes the lyrics are, as you've heard, they're sort of nonsensical. They sort of tell a story. They sort of don't. You never quite learn exactly why Reuben got mad and broke his fireman's neck. And you also never figure out why the singer of the song wants to take his razor blade and lay old Reuben in the shade.
Yeah, that's a great old-timey, dark...
Very, very dark and mysterious... the origins of that, I don't know. I'm not
and
quite...
Make Me a Graveyard of My Own.
Make Me a Graveyard of My Own, yeah.
That's pretty dark.
Very dark. And there's a lot of different verses to this song that people have written and played and recorded over the years. You can find a million different recordings from the 20s all the way up through the 70s. I mean, up through modern day. A lot of people still record this tune. Really popular. Crossed over in the bluegrass world and became a much less sinister tune, of course. It was cleaned up by the bluegrassers.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it's a classic folk song, what they call a train song.
Exactly, a classic train song.
Yeah.
And so I also find that, if I'm singing the more neutral or friendly verses, sometimes I'll stick with the cleaner beginning my melody line on the 1st fret. But when I get to the more sinister, dark lines,
So you're actually changing the melody as you play the tune?
As I play the tune, so
that's
relative to the ill or neutral intent of the lyrics.
Lovely.
Which is really interesting.
There's a kind of a high part you play, too. Is that just a variation of the low part?
There is. And so again... sometimes I hit the 3rd fret on the 4th string here, or 2nd from the top, either way we want to look at it, which is a variation I only use when I sing a verse that has a high, an emphasis on a high note. So, for instance, I sing, oh, I'm gonna take my razor blade, lay old Reuben in the shade, gonna start me a graveyard of my own. And other verses, I'll omit that and just sing, old Reuben made a train, Lord, he put it on the track, run it to the Lord knows where. So there's just a few little extra things, but again, in this tuning, the melody really, I feel like, is almost built around this tuning more than the tuning being built around the melody. It's so perfect. You can get anything you want in that modal scale, but you can also throw in some major accents if you need to. It's a really, really great tuning. A lot of fun.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for breaking that down for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to your new record coming out, which has been recorded here at Indian Creek Studios.
That's right.
In West by God, Virginia.
West by God, featuring this banjo and many others.
Yeah, which the recording session was half swimming in the creek and going into caves.
Yeah.
And then half getting weird at night with old ballads and weird banjo tunes.
Yeah, wasn't exactly what you call a structured recording progress.
It came through on the microphone. It was like there was an essence to it.
Yeah, there very much was. So it was a lot of fun, and showcase a lot of different banjo tones and all claw hammer, but a lot of interesting stylistic variants within claw hammer. So it was a lot of fun to stretch out my right and left hands by clawing them up. So.
Well, that's awesome. Well, you want to play Reuben's Train one more time for us?
Yeah, I'll give you guys one more go round with it.
And we'll head out. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm Chance McCoy, and this is JP Harris.
That's right.
And if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, you can support our music and videos through my Patreon, patreon.com/Chance McCoy Music, or you can just drop a tip in one of our virtual tip buckets that we'll have links to in there. We have paypal.me/Chance McCoy Music if you feel like you want to support what we're doing. We are unemployed pandemic musicians.
That's right.
Except for him. He's also like a great carpenter. So
yeah, I got a side hustle.
He's got a side hustle,
my
luckily.
main hustle.
But I do not. So if you'd like to support me, that would be fantastic.
Chance needs some new tires on the truck.
I do need some new tires. They're looking pretty bare thin. So, all right, man. Well, JP, man, thanks for coming and doing this. This is the Masterclass on Fretless Banjo here by master musician Mr. JP Harris. Reuben's Train, take us away.
All right. I can hear that train bell like that, yeah. Well, old Reuben made a train, put it on the track, run it to the Lord knows where. Oh me, oh my, run it to the Lord knows where. Well, you ought to been in town when old Reuben's train rolled down. You could hear a whistle blow 100 miles. If his train run right, see my woman tomorrow night, 500 miles from my home. Well, let's hear that train bell dinging. Well, old Reuben, he got mad, broke his fireman's neck, and now he can't read no letter from his maw. Oh, it's oh me, oh my, can't read no letter from his maw. Gonna take my razor blade, lay old Reuben in the shade, gonna start me a graveyard of my own. Oh me, oh my, start me a graveyard of my own. He's running to Lord knows where. Oh me, oh my, running to Lord knows where. There we go. That's Reuben's train.